Listener discretion is advised. Hello and welcome to True Crime, the podcast that helps you find new, emerging, and undiscovered true crime podcasts. I'm Greg, the host and curator of True Crime. Today's episode is from A Nefarious Nightmare. A Nefarious Nightmare is focused on victim-centered advocacy and raising awareness about crimes against those deemed especially vulnerable. If you like today's episode, make sure to check out the episode description for links to subscribe. All right, let's get this show started.
Begin.
A Nefarious Nightmare contains themes that may be explicit or triggering for some. Specific warnings and disclaimers will be mentioned in the show notes. A Nefarious Nightmare assumes all parties that are mentioned in these cases to be innocent unless proven guilty in a court of law. Listener discretion is strongly advised. Welcome to Season 4.
As of right now, there's been absolutely no justice for Alex. None whatsoever. The police opened and closed the case faster than I would have even thought possible. And no matter what I say or do, even if they know the truth, they're not looking. What's really strange is the new Indiana law, SCA 177. When I found out about that, November of 21, I immediately submitted a request to the state police under that law that they reopen his case and actually investigate it. That request is still pending. They acknowledged it, and it's been 13 months, and it is still sitting there pending. Alex's passing affected everybody in a lot of ways. He was the life of the party. He was always the one that was entertaining. He was more social than the rest of us. And all the subsequent things that have followed have just been tremendously evil. There's not a nicer way to put it. When you're looking for answers and the people who should have the answers either don't have them or refuse to give them to you, it's horrible. It's like the world is still moving, and for everybody else, life is going on, but for you, it stopped.
Alex VanDalsen left on foot late evening on February 3rd of 2021. He was later found dead. Police haven't been very helpful with the answers, and his mother and the rest of his family just want closure as to the mystery surrounding his death.
We had the pleasure of interviewing Jennifer VanDalsen, and we invite you all to listen to her dive in so that you all can draw your own conclusions and help get more eyes on this case. Today's episode is a major revision of A Purple Handgun, the unsolved case of Alex VanDalsen, which originally aired January 14th, 2022. With that, I'm Courtney Fenner.
And I'm Amanda Cronin. And A Nefarious Nightmare presents He Always Sang. What happened to Alex VanDalsen?
Before we get into it, I want to explain the revision real quick. Originally, we recorded the episode A Purple Handgun on January 14th, 2022 to discuss this case. We've since grown and woke up a bit more to doing things a lot more ethically. With that, we decided that we wanted to do this correctly, as well as continue to keep eyes on this case, and we were very fortunate to interview and record Jennifer VanDalsen this time around, as we wanted you all to hear it straight from her. If you'd like to hear the original episode, it will now only be available on Patreon because, frankly, looking back on that, we just aren't happy with how that one turned out.
We are about to hear from Jennifer, but first, a recap. Alex VanDalsen was born Jasmine VanDalsen. When she was 15, she came out as gay, and a few years later, she started identifying as a male. So, in this story, we will be using he, him pronouns and refer to him as Alex, the name he gave himself.
He and his family lived in Lafayette, Indiana. Alex was a good kid according to his mom, Jennifer. She said that he was very adventurous, fun-loving, and free-spirited. At times, according to his mom, he was also a bit too trusting. And there's just something about this type of personality that lends a pretty ominous foreshadowing to it from what we've noticed anyway.
There are several examples from cases including Gabby Petito, Justin Barnyard, Jennifer Daughtry, April Tinsley. The list goes on. This isn't to say that the victims are at fault or that we should just up and be complete assholes to everyone. This is pretty much a cautionary statement to say that we all need to be careful who we trust in general because people do take advantage. It's an unfortunate fact.
Alex loved to help people and make people laugh. His mother also says, quote, "He always kept me on my toes. Both of his sisters were not adventurous like he was," end quote. He sounded like he was just this really cool kid.
He was always talking or singing. He enjoyed road trips and was always driving somewhere. In middle school, he played soccer, but his asthma became too much of a challenge, and although he was very good, he just couldn't handle dealing with the asthma while playing soccer. Please remember the fact that he did have asthma, and it does pertain to the case. He didn't play any sports after that. Jennifer said that they tried to get him interested in other hobbies, but nothing really stuck. He did collect rocks though, and was especially intrigued by rocks that were unique in shape and color.
Now, in the original episode, A Purple Handgun, we asked Jennifer, when Alex transitioned into a male identity, what were the reactions of those around him? She said that no one seemed to think it was a big deal. He originally came out as gay, quote, "I'd been making jokes for years at that point that all my kids could be gay, so I didn't have grandkids because I knew he was and wanted him to be comfortable saying something," end quote.
Then it was a few years later, somewhere around him turning 18, according to her, that he said he wanted to start transitioning. Jennifer said, "Okay, let's look into it while you're still on my insurance. See if it helps with anything." She then spoke with a friend from work who had also transitioned. They gave Jennifer the name of a doctor and a rundown of the very first several appointments. Jennifer then told Alex about this and told him to make an appointment when he was ready, but unfortunately, he never did. Jennifer goes on to say, quote, "I believe mostly because he wanted to pay for everything himself, even though I offered to cover what my insurance didn't cover as long as I could afford it," end quote. Jennifer even offered to pay for his legal name change, which he was unable to do at that time. He declined, likely because he wanted to pay for it himself.
We did also ask if Alex was ever bullied that she knew of, and she said, quote, "I'm sure that Alex was bullied, but he never mentioned it. He seemed to just ignore those kind of people. He'd walk up to a total stranger and introduce himself, saying things like, 'Hi, I'm Alex and I'm transgender.' I watched him do it a million times, and everywhere he went, he made at least one new friend," end quote.
When we asked if Alex had any issues that people may not be aware of that should be considered, like history of drug abuse, physical abuse, mental abuse, etc., she said, quote, "Not that I know of. Alex survived my very abusive ex-husband, who was his biological father. He used to beat the hell out of me, swore when I left he'd kill me, and tried numerous times but never succeeded."
According to Jennifer, Alex did have some history of mental health issues, and she states that Alex did have a history of depression and anxiety along with self-harm. He'd been actively managing them, and he was attending therapy and had not been self-harming for a few months, and he hadn't even been speaking about suicide.
We asked if he had any known enemies, and she stated, quote, "I would say yes, but he would probably say no. He had a few ex-girlfriends that weren't stable, and he had a quote-unquote friend who had set him up to be robbed at gunpoint back in 2019. This so-called friend was desperate for money and set Alex up to be robbed," end quote.
Today's case all pretty much started on February 3rd, 2021, at around 11:45 p.m. Alex, who was 21 years old at the time, left on foot and was last seen wearing a pair of jeans, a shirt, and a thin hoodie. It was 20 degrees and more than a foot of snow was on the ground. They know this because they have cameras in their driveway, and he didn't tell anyone where he was going. Alex's parents were at work, his sister and grandmother were home asleep, and when Alex left, he had left with no wallet, no car, no phone, basically nothing but the clothes on his back. It was freezing outside that night with almost a foot of snow on the ground.
From here, you will hear Jennifer VanDalsen recount the series of events that led to the mystery behind Alex VanDalsen's death.
My name is Jen VanDalsen. Oh, these days, my main hobbies are investigating different true crime stories. I used to collect Funkos and die-cast cars. My kids and I would go hunt down various new releases. But since Alex has passed away, my main focus has been just finding cases that relate, new ways to have the case investigated, looked at. My son is Alexander Blake VanDalsen, goes by Alex, 21. He was still just a baby at 21. Life should just be beginning. Oh, this happened in Lafayette, Indiana. It started the night of February 3rd, 2021. Alex was not found until February 9th, 2021. Due to that, we don't know for certain what day he passed away, whether it was the 4th, 5th, so on. I believe it was the 4th, but I don't have concrete evidence to back that up just yet. There was not enough done by law enforcement or the coroner's office to make a definitive decision on that. Oh, Alex kept me on my toes. He was by far the most adventurous between him and his siblings. He has 2 sisters, one older, one younger, but he was the one always up to something. Always goofing around, but would always make you laugh. That was always his biggest goal, was to just make people smile. He loved the outdoors and warm temperatures, not so much in cold. He was only about 90 pounds and barely 5 foot tall. So cold weather was not his favorite thing. He typically wore a sweatshirt all year round, even out in the summer. He loved to drive. I bought him 3 different vehicles. The first one got T-boned by a semi. Luckily, he didn't have a scratch on him. But every vehicle had well over 30,000, 40,000 miles put on them in a short amount of time. He just loved to go out and explore new things. But he also never knew a stranger. Unfortunately, it didn't matter who you were, where you were. He would stop and talk to you, try to make friends with you. If he was on his last $5 to his name and a perfect stranger needed it, he'd give it to him. He was incredibly trusting, which always made me nervous. In the world today, that's just not always the greatest of things. Alex told us that he wanted to transition around the time he turned 18. His friends and family were all very accepting. There's some family members who don't agree with it, but he didn't really have much to do with those family members anyway, so I didn't see that as too much of a concern, really. But his friends, especially his close friends, were all super accepting. He hadn't yet started the process. We had discussed places he could go that my insurance would help cover, that we'd looked at and gotten the paperwork to change his name. But unfortunately, he hadn't done that yet. I offered to pay for it, but he wanted to save the money to pay for it himself. But I really wish that I would have talked him into it. I have a couple of theories. I would never mention names without the evidence to support it. And I have a little bit of evidence, but it's not concrete just yet. I do believe it was somebody that Alex knew. I believe it was somebody that Alex trusted, even though this person had shown on numerous occasions that they shouldn't be trusted. Alex just wanted to always believe the best in everybody. So we were at work. We ended up finding out that Alex had left the home about 11:44 p.m. the night of the 3rd. We didn't realize that. We had got home about 2 a.m. on the 4th from work and just figured that he was in bed. He was supposed to have started a new job that night, but he forgot his paperwork here at home. So he said they were going to reschedule it for a different day. The next afternoon on the 4th, I checked in his room before going to work because he would normally come out and talk to me, see me before I left for work, and he hadn't came out yet. But he wasn't in his room. At the time, I didn't think anything big about it. His car was here, but I figured I must have just missed his girlfriend picking him up. They oftentimes left his car here, so it didn't seem weird that his car was still here and he wasn't. That evening at work, my oldest daughter, Kirsten, called me and told me that they couldn't find Alex. That his girlfriend, Genesis, had came to the house because she hadn't been able to get a hold of him, and his phone and his keys were in his room. So at that point, I left work. I went to a few places that he would normally go to, and he wasn't there. So I came home and called 911 to start a missing persons report. That was about 10 p.m. At 11:30, when they still hadn't showed up yet, I called them back. They finally showed up just after midnight, so technically February 5th. They took a report, didn't really do or say anything else. He didn't have his inhaler. We thought maybe they would issue a silver alert. They did not. The next afternoon, I learned about a retired officer that had a canine search dog. Made contact with her. She then made contact with the sheriff's department to let them know that she was going to come do a search with her dog. They came out that afternoon to do that, and the sheriff's department did send 2 deputies to assist her. The one deputy was incredibly rude. He made the statement that he had been here the year prior to do a wellness check on Alex, so he believed this was just going to be the same type situation. However, when he was here for said wellness check the year prior, Alex and I were both present. None of the kids had ever been missing, none of them had ever taken off, and it was not like Alex at all to go 24 hours without getting a hold of me. Even earlier in the year, he quarantined due to COVID at his girlfriend's house, and he would video call me every day. Disappearing for that period of time was not like him at all. So this was nothing like a simple wellness check because he had overslept and somebody called in to have a wellness check done. This was an extreme situation for him, but the deputy didn't care. He was just rude, clearly didn't want to be here, and was not helpful. They ended the search. It didn't last very long, and it seemed as though the dog lost the scent about where we believed Alex would have gotten into a car, which would make sense because the temperatures when he left the house were below freezing. We had at least 6 inches of snow on the ground. He was wearing a pair of jeans with sweats over them, a long sleeve t-shirt, and a thin hoodie that he wore all year round. He did not have a jacket on. He wasn't wearing snow boots. He didn't have gloves. He just simply was not prepared to be out in that kind of cold for very long. So it made sense that a car would have picked him up a few houses down where our cameras didn't. We continued with our search groups. There were a lot of his friends and a lot of friends of my oldest daughter, plus my oldest daughter and her husband. We were all out in various groups. Some of my friends, co-workers, everybody came together. Even our neighbors out here were trying to help in searching the surrounding areas out here for Alex. We obviously had no luck. The lady who had the search dog called a friend of hers that had a thermal imaging drone. So he came out and was mapping the area with his drone. Unfortunately, he didn't find anything with his drone either. They kept telling us to stay around a 5-mile radius of the house. We went a little over that, sometimes way over that. Just went to places that Alex would normally visit or go hang out. The news station wouldn't even run a report that he was missing. Claimed that they did not get the information from a sheriff's department, so they didn't run the story. On February 9th, about 1 p.m., a city snowplow worker found Alex on a city trail. Very odd, remote area most people don't know exists. Almost 10 miles from our house. It had snowed on and off for days. This gentleman was plowing the trail and found Alex. He was already deceased with a layer of snow covering him. The city police responded as he was in city limits. They seemed to halfway be taking it serious, despite even they acknowledged on body cams that they had already potentially drove and walked all over potential evidence. They didn't tape off the area because they said it was remote. Their body cam footage shows they believed it to be homicide. They believed when they showed up, he had his hands in his pockets, laying flat on his back with his ankles crossed.
You're listening to an episode of A Nefarious Nightmare on True Crime by Indie Drop-In Network. We're going to take a quick break. All right, now back to this episode of A Nefarious Nightmare.
They did end up finding a gun underneath him, but staying true to themselves, apparently, they did not test the gun in any manner. They didn't even run ownership on the gun for months until I pushed and pushed. The only thing that they did was check it to see if it had been reported lost or stolen. At some point in time, they switched their entire narrative from homicide to suicide. I believe when they figured out who he was is when they switched that narrative. I've asked them repeatedly, and they won't answer my question. They direct me to read their reports. Well, their reports don't say. He was then at the scene, placed in the back of the sheriff's department Dodge Ram, transported probably about a mile before he was then handed over to a body removal company to be transported to the morgue. They scheduled an autopsy for 2 days later, but the sheriff's detective said when he showed up for the autopsy, he was told by the coroner's office that they would not be doing a full autopsy because he was still frozen. So they would just be looking at his head wound. At this point in time, my husband and I are planning the funeral. We have no idea what had happened. They had came to notify us at 4 p.m. on the 9th, and when they notified us that he was found, and he was found deceased, they told us that he had no obvious signs of trauma, so we had to wait for the autopsy to find out how he passed away. So we began planning the funeral based off of that information. For the funeral director to call us Saturday morning and tell us that he had a gunshot wound to the head and that we had to change the funeral plans. When I asked the detective why, which of course I couldn't reach him until Monday, my husband and I kept that detail to ourselves, hoping that they did not tell us that so that they had time to investigate before anybody found out. I gave them way too much benefit because when I asked the detective why he lied, he said he didn't mean to mislead us. He had no rhyme or reason for the lies. We had to find out from the funeral home that he had a gunshot wound. We had to find out through archived scanner calls where he was actually found because they lied about that as well. for some reason, they seem to have wanted to keep all of this a very big mystery, even to us. Yet the entire time they were calling it suicide, so they weren't doing it. That's what it feels like. What's even better is the people at the funeral home don't talk to me since I started airing publicly about how the sheriff's department did this, and the funeral home were the ones to tell us. And that specific funeral director watched my kids grow up. Like, he was neighbors to myself or my parents for years and years, but now doesn't even speak to me. Like, I'm not the one who did this. I'm just telling the truth. So they ended up finding a 9mm underneath his lower back hip area, around where his right elbow would have been. It seems very strange to me, one, the way that his body was laying there, with his ankles crossed, his legs straight out, laying flat on his back with his hands in his pockets, and the gun underneath. They claimed that he would have been sitting there and shot himself and the gun falling backwards. However, we've tried to recreate that. It doesn't work. A few other people have tried to recreate that. Can't get it to work. So, to me, that seems implausible that would have happened. Plus, the deputy coroner who showed up on the scene claimed that the left side was the entrance. Only the somewhat autopsy 2 days later claimed the right side was the entrance. So they don't even seem to be able to agree on whether the left or the right was the entrance. To me, that poses a problem. He was right-handed. So that depends. The left side, which at the scene they called the entrance, was 1 centimeter by 1.5, while the right side was 5 or 6 by 6.5, which, to reference, like, that right side would have been about the size of a chewing can of tobacco. But they can't agree. To me, that would have been enough to look farther to determine, is the left side the entrance? Is the right side the why didn't we look at that a little better? I've never hidden from anybody the fact that Alex struggled with anxiety and depression for years. I didn't hide that when I reported him missing, which I believe is part of the problem, because I am afraid that my telling them is what enabled them to change their narrative and try to make the pieces fit what they wanted versus getting to the truth. But I can't go back and change that. And I mean, they did a wellness check on him before, so they knew. I mean, they would have ran the history and seen, the deputy made it quite clear. He remembered the wellness check. Okay, good for you, buddy. But, so even if I wouldn't have told them, they would have ran the history and seen that. But mental illness should not be an excuse for the police to not do their jobs. On the last day of January, Alex went and got a haircut. He was getting ready to start a new job on February 1st. He had stayed the night before at his girlfriend's house. The plan was she was going to work that afternoon until, I believe it was like 10 o'clock. He was just going to hang out at her house until she got off work, and then she was going to pick him up, and they were coming here to Alex's house. He decided that he was bored, texted me and asked me if I could come get him and bring him home before I went to work. And I thought, you know what? I'm just going to call into work. We'll make an evening of it. So his younger sister, Morgan, and I went and picked him up. We went and got something to eat. We ran around looking for new Funkos. And then we came home, played some bowling on the Wii. Everything was absolutely normal. The next day, it had started snowing, and Alex's older sister has 2 little kids. It was cold and snowing, and she was going to have to run them to the grocery store. Alex volunteered that he would go to the store for her and take it out to her house. So him and Morgan did that. They went to Walmart, got stuff that she needed, took it to her, played with the kids for a few hours, visited with her, and then came home late that night. The next day, he got up, he went to Chase, got his paperwork for his direct deposit for the new job, came home, took a nap, and I saw him before I left for work. He reminded me that he was starting his new job, so he might not be home until after I got home from work. And I told him if he wasn't home yet, I would wait up, see how his day went, and that was the last I talked to him. Alex's passing affected everybody in a lot of ways. He was the life of the party. He was always the one that was entertaining. He was more social than the rest of us. And all the subsequent things that have followed have just been tremendously evil. There's not a nicer way to put it. When you're looking for answers and the people who should have the answers either don't have them or refuse to give them to you, it's horrible. It's like the world is still moving, and for everybody else, life is going on, but for you, it stopped. What's really strange is the new Indiana law, SCA 177. When I found out about that, November of 21, I immediately submitted a request to the state police under that law that they reopen his case and actually investigate it. That request is still pending. They acknowledged it, and it's been 13 months, and it is still sitting there pending. Like, I'm not sure. The local police kept using the excuse to a reporter that I had hired an attorney and did a tort claim. Well, in 2021, I did hire an attorney, and he filed a tort claim. It wasn't a route that I wanted to go, but here I am. My son has passed away under suspicious circumstances. The police either cannot or will not answer my question. They quit answering my emails in any way, shape, or form April 5th of 2021. That was the last contact that I had with them. It was not until June or July that I hired the attorney because I didn't know what else to do. You're in that kind of situation, you're going to do the only thing that you can find. And at that point in time, I didn't know what else to do. And they use that for an excuse as to why they can't talk about the case. No, you could have fully spoke to me about the case. If you really believed suicide like you claim, why would you have not tried to show me the evidence, convince me of that, instead of just cutting off all communication for months? That doesn't make any sense to me. Sad to say, when this all initially occurred, I kept telling myself that this is law enforcement. Why would you do this? Surely you wouldn't do such a thing. But the questions kept compounding, and their answers either were not present or they would answer by telling me that I had the reports, read them. Well, of course I've read the reports, but the reports don't answer my questions, hence why I'm asking them. And the more and more they deflected and refused to answer my questions, the more concerning it became. And the more I started looking at other cases, whether they were local, within the same state, out of state. And unfortunately, this happens way too often. And not just here in our county, but everywhere. They are given way too much power and control with nobody overseeing that. And the community as a whole is too willing to just take their answers and not make them answer for what really happened. I believe all my family and friends have been incredibly supportive of this. We all want the same goal, and that's to find out what truly happened. There's no right or wrong. It's simply a matter of truth. And that's everybody's goal in this. As of right now, there's been absolutely no justice for Alex. None whatsoever. The police opened and closed the case faster than I would have even thought possible. And no matter what I say or do, even if they know the truth, they're not looking. I believe that they will be by the time this is all done. And I believe we will eventually get justice that is deserved. I trust no one. I shouldn't say that so much. I have a couple of friends and a few family that I do wholeheartedly trust. But aside from that, I don't trust anybody. There's too many people, even not just the police, but there are people that will just suddenly message or call me like, oh, I want to help, and then they disappear. Like, oh, you wanted to help so bad, like, why'd you disappear? Did you think that there wasn't going to be enough news coverage here for you? Were you hoping for more of a spotlight on yourself? And that's what it seems like. Like, there are some very good people in this, like you. And then there are some people that do this and seem to do this for what publicity they can muster up for themselves. I tell people all the time, this is not my story, this is Alex's. And I just want his story to be heard, and I want to be able to find the truth. It's just hard. It's a constant reminder, which the constant reminder is always there, but then this plays on it even more. Definitely. Yeah. My youngest has her permit, and it has definitely skyrocketed my anxiety with her driving. I do my best to not let it show, but I'm sure that there are times where it's just impossible. I think the biggest thing that I struggled with the most in the beginning of all this is not everything is what it seems. And just because a law enforcement officer says so doesn't make it so. If your instincts and your gut is telling you that something's off, go with that. Don't wait 4 to 6 weeks thinking that law enforcement's handling it, because in my case, I waited that 4 to 6 weeks thinking that they were handling it. I could have started working on things a little sooner if I had just realized that it wasn't my grief talking. It wasn't my fears. We had valid questions. We had valid reasons to be concerned about their lack of, and they weren't able to answer them. I hope for Alex's story to be more known. He was a good, wonderful kid who did not deserve this. And I don't hate law enforcement. I certainly don't agree with what they did in this case. And I hope that there are still good officers out there. But I fear that we are placing too much faith and trust in them when they're not deserving of it. So my hope is that the system can be changed. Cases like this don't get ignored.
This case is still ongoing, but starting to gain a little bit of traction. We will be sure to update as soon as we hear anything or get the okay to do so. Alex's case has sat heavy in both of our hearts since we first heard about it, and we want to thank Jennifer so much for being open and vulnerable with us.
If you would like to help in any way, please visit the links in our show notes. There's a Facebook group you can join, a change.org petition to sign, a GoFundMe to donate to, and we also ask all creators that might be listening to please cover this story, because Alex's case definitely needs more attention on it. We always want to apply pressure, so let's apply pressure. There it is, the call to action.
Yes, podcasters and creators, please keep this case in circulation. Alex VanDalsen's family needs the closure and justice needs to be seen. This case is still unsolved, and we want to bring this case way more attention and a deeper investigation. If you would like any information, you may visit the links in the show notes, Or you can reach out to us as well if you need a point in the right direction.
Before we wrap up today's episode, please don't forget to join our Patreon for bonus content, such as our Not So Nefarious Criminals podcast. Each week we have a guest, and we always forget. We talk about the lighter side of crime, such as Florida Man. It's a great palate cleanser.
We will be at the 2023 True Crime and Paranormal Podcast Festival in Austin, Texas, which would be this year, August 25th through 27th. So come see us. There will be a ton of great people there, and you do not want to miss this. It's so much fun, and you get to be around advocates. Tickets are for sale at truecrimepodcastfestival.com, and we will have stuff to give away.
Alex VanDalsen was a kind soul who loved to laugh, sing, and had the most beautiful heart. Whatever happened to him was horrible, and he deserves to finally rest in peace. Alex, like everyone we cover on this podcast, is a bee. Bees are resilient, strong, yet vulnerable. We need bees to survive and thrive in life. Without bees, we as humans are doomed. So always be vigilant. For when you mess with the bees,
you get the hive.
Thank you for listening to A Nefarious Nightmare. Music used in the theme was originally recorded by Ghost Stories Incorporated, remixed by Ryan RCX Murphy. Additional background music is provided by Epidemic Sound. A Nefarious Nightmare is scripted, researched, and produced by Courtney Finner and Amanda Cronin. This podcast is a Cloud 10 podcast managed by Sim Sarna, Sahiba Krieger, and Jamie Rice of Murderish and Dirty Money Moves. You can help us grow our show by leaving us a 5-star written review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Or you can join our Patreon for lighthearted bonus content. Thank you, and as always, be vigilant.
Thanks again for listening to True Crime by Indie Drop-In Network. If you would like to nominate a true crime podcast to be featured, just send me a tweet at Indie Drop-In. I'd also love to hear if one of our featured podcasts is now your favorite show. Indie Drop-In survives off ad revenue and listener donations. If you would like to contribute, please consider buying me a coffee. You can go to buymeacoffee.com/Indie Drop-In. If you look at the very bottom of the episode description, I put a link in there to make it really easy. Indie Drop-In has many other shows that you also might like. Just go to indiedropin.com. All right, see you next week.